Hey guys, tonight we step barefoot onto the frosty shores of Viking Scandinavia. The air is crisp, biting even, and somewhere beyond the rocky bluff, gulls circle over a distant fishing boat. There's the faint smell of salt, seaweed, and smoke from peat fires curling out of turf-roofed longhouses. You're not here to raid or to conquer, not tonight. You're here for something far cozier, to find out exactly what a Viking would feed you if you showed up hungry around 800 AD. Now before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you notice is that life here revolves around the coast. Most Viking settlements cling to the water's edge, not just for the scenic views or the occasional dragon-headed ship pulling in, but because the sea is their pantry. Cod, herring, halibut, even seals. If it swims or flops in the water, it's probably on the menu. You follow a small group of fishermen hauling up their nets. The catch today? Mostly cod. It's wriggling, silvery, and destined either for the stew pot or to be split, salted, and dried on wooden racks until it becomes something called stockfish, basically protein-flavored bark. You'll chew on that later, slowly. But food isn't just about what you catch. It's also about where you are. Viking lands stretch from icy Greenland to more temperate parts of Scandinavia, and what ends up on the table depends heavily on latitude. In Iceland, for example, there's barely any wood for cooking. In Norway, fjords provide deep, nutrient-rich waters teeming with fish, while in Sweden, you get a bit more game and grains. So the Viking diet isn't one thing. It's a flexible, sometimes desperate negotiation with the land. Still, the ocean is the big boss. Most Norse communities develop right on the water because inland travel is a logistical nightmare. Roads? Ha! Imagine dragging a cart through a swampy pine forest full of trolls. Okay, not real trolls, but you get the idea. One mainstream fact historians agree on. Fish was the backbone of the Viking diet. It was eaten fresh in the warmer months, dried or fermented for winter. But here's the quirky part. Seals were fair game too. Imagine biting into a thick cut of seal meat. It's oily, dark, and smells kind of like if beef and anchovies had an awkward blind date. Not exactly date night material unless your idea of romance involves blubber. Now you might be wondering, what about farming? Surely they had chickens or something. Well, yes, but farming here is gritty. The land is rocky, the soil thin, and the growing season is basically 3 polite weeks in July. Still, the Vikings manage. They raise sheep, goats, cows, and pigs. They even grow barley and rye, though not much else. Tomatoes, potatoes, and corn. Those are New World foods, completely unknown to our Norse friends. There's a scholarly debate about how much the average Viking actually relied on farming versus raiding or trading. Some say the ideal Viking lifestyle was a mix. Grow what you can, steal what you can't, and hope the gods aren't hungry. Others argue that most Norse folks were just humble farmers who raided once or twice and bragged about it for the rest of their lives. You pause now, watching a woman gut a fish with a stone knife. Quick, practiced movements, not unlike opening a stubborn package of instant noodles. She drops the innards into a bucket, probably for some future broth or animal feed. Nothing goes to waste here, not even fish heads. Especially not fish heads. The smell of the shore is rich, briny, fishy, layered with smoke from nearby fires. You walk past rows of wooden racks where long, pale fish fillets hang like ghostly laundry. Gulls scream overhead, hoping to steal a bite. It's not glamorous, but it's survival. There's a small child sitting cross-legged on the ground, gnawing on a dried strip of fish. No sauce, no seasoning, no dipping bowl of aioli. Just teeth versus protein. You try a piece and immediately regret it. It's like chewing on an old sandal someone accidentally salted. And yet, it's filling. Dinner here isn't plated, it's piled. Bowls, slabs, hands, whatever gets the food from fire to face. You hear laughter from a nearby longhouse. The mealtime isn't just nourishment, it's community. Stories are shared, alliances renewed, and sometimes small conflicts solved over a shared slab of whale blubber. As you head toward the longhouse to warm up, you pass a few curious ingredients being laid out. Wild onions, dried kelp, seaweed, and something that smells like barnyard pickles. You don't ask, not yet. The night's just getting started, and the Viking pantry is deeper than it looks. The first light of morning in a Viking settlement doesn't arrive gently. It barges in, misty, cold, and accompanied by the clatter of chores already underway. You blink yourself awake beneath a fur blanket, nostrils full of smoke and sheep. And as your stomach gives a polite grumble, you realize it's time for breakfast. But forget the idea of a full English or a pancake stack. Here, in the chilly half-dark of a Norse morning, you're about to be introduced to something far more practical. Barley gruel. It's called grauter, a kind of hot porridge made from barley, water, maybe a splash of sour whey if you're lucky, and salt if you're really lucky. The texture is somewhere between oatmeal and concrete mortar. You spoon it out of a wooden bowl while sitting by the central hearth, warmed more by the fire's embers than the food itself. Despite the humble ingredients, this stuff keeps you going. Barley was one of the few grains hardy enough to grow in northern climates, and it became a breakfast staple for Vikings across the region. Richer households might mix in some goat milk or even a bit of honey, but for the average freeman or thrall, it's just grain and grit. You take a bite, it's fine. Warm, bland, a little nutty. Definitely chewier than you'd expect for a porridge. You consider asking for brown sugar, and then remember it won't exist for another 800 years. One child eats his grauter with a piece of dried fish dunked in for flavor. Another swirls in a dollop of skyr, which we'll get to soon. But spoiler alert, it's Viking yogurt, and it's definitely tangy. The breakfast table, if you can call the packed dirt floor that, is quiet except for the occasional slurp and a few yawns. Mornings here are not for small talk. Here's the mainstream historical consensus. Most Vikings started their day with something hot, filling, and easy to make in big batches. Grauter fit the bill. But archaeologists have found evidence of other morning offerings too, like bread, cheese, or even leftover stew from the night before. Food waste was a luxury few could afford. Now for the quirky bit. Some Viking households added birch sap to their breakfast gruel. Tapped straight from trees in early spring, birch sap was mildly sweet and thought to be healthy. Imagine maple syrup's underachieving cousin. It's subtle, but refreshing. You wonder if your bowl could use some. And then remember you're supposed to be grateful it's not fish-flavored today. But not everyone's gruel was created equal. Gender, age, and status all shaped what your bowl looked like. Thralls, the enslaved people in Norse society, got the thinnest gruel, sometimes with the barley husks left in. Children often ate theirs cooled down and mixed with milk, and warriors, if they were off to raid or patrol, got larger servings. Or maybe a bite of yesterday's smoked meat tossed in for energy. There's still scholarly debate over how varied the Viking breakfast really was. Some historians argue that large households might have maintained more diverse offerings. leftover meat, cold beer, early morning skyer. Others suggest that Grauter was the great equalizer, cheap, fast, and filling. After all, when winter gives you just 5 hours of light, you don't waste time with brunch menus. As you finish the last gluey spoonful, someone tosses more peat onto the fire. The smoke thickens, curling through a hole in the roof, and you can't help but notice how the longhouse smells like a stew of yesterday, today, and sheep. You step outside for a breath of fresh air. The sun is barely more than a pale smear on the horizon. Morning in a Viking village is short, chilly, and industrious. People are already tending animals, fetching water, and, crucially, preparing the day's real meals. Breakfast was just the warm-up act. You pass a woman grinding barley with a hand quern, 2 flat stones, one rotating on the other. It's slow, laborious work. Her hands are strong, her rhythm steady. The flour she's producing will go into bread, gruel, and maybe even thicken a soup. It's a daily reminder that every meal starts with muscle. Nearby, a man feeds the goats and sheep. Milk, wool, meat. These animals are more than food. They're life insurance. A cow, if you're rich enough to have one, is treated like treasure. And the pigs? Loud, greedy, and somehow always muddy, they're favorites for feasting. But today, they're just being fattened. The air smells sharper now, a mix of peat smoke, wet wool, and the promise of rain. You head back inside for a warm drink. No coffee, of course, but perhaps some watered-down ale or a mug of fermented whey, if you're brave. Vikings didn't drink water casually. Rivers and wells could be teeming with bacteria. So even at breakfast, a low-alcohol ale was the safest bet. You sip it cautiously. It tastes like someone left bread soaking in pond water, which technically is not too far off. As the morning winds on, so does the work. Meals aren't something you just have. They're things you make, plan, and adapt around the seasons. You're already starting to appreciate the Viking way of eating. Simple, seasonal, and occasionally suspicious. But don't worry, we're just getting to the fun stuff. Later today, you're going hunting. For seals, possibly reindeer. Hopefully not disappointment. You stretch your limbs in the cold morning air, already regretting agreeing to go hunting with the locals. Your breakfast of barley gruel is long gone, and now your boots squelch in the wet grass as you follow a group of Viking men and older boys through a wooded trail toward the coast. The plan? To hunt seal or reindeer, depending on what shows up first. The Vikings aren't just fierce raiders. They're surprisingly resourceful hunters and herders. Food doesn't fall from the sky here, unless you count the occasional suicidal herring, so every calorie counts. And in this chilly world, seal meat is basically a high-fat, waterproof miracle. You're given a spear, which you promptly hand back, because let's be honest, you're more of a podcast listener than a seal harvester. The others don't mind. They laugh softly, wrapped in thick cloaks of wool and fur, and start scanning the nearby rocks where seals often sun themselves. There's a practiced calm to it, a rhythm, like they've done this 100 times. And they have. Mainstream historical fact. Vikings along coastal regions regularly hunted seals, walruses, and seabirds. Seal blubber provided vital fat for both cooking and lamp fuel, while the meat was salted or dried for storage. But here's the quirky twist. Not all seals were fair game. In some regions, folklore warned that seals could shed their skins and become people, so hunting them was risky, not because of claws, but curses. Today, though, the hunt yields nothing. You'll have to settle for something more terrestrial. Goat herding. Back at the village, the goats have broken loose again. A small child is chasing one with a stick, yelling something you assume is a swear word, though in Old Norse, it probably translates to goat-faced trouble sponge. You help corral the shaggy beasts back into their pen, and as you do, one headbutts you in the thigh. No damage, just pride. Goats are the unsung heroes of Viking farms. Hardy, stubborn, and not too picky about what they eat. They provide milk, cheese, and eventually meat. Their hides are used for clothes, their bones for tools, and their droppings for, well, fertilizer. Goats are the full package. There's a scholarly debate about how much of a Viking's diet came from domesticated animals versus foraged or wild sources. In more fertile regions of Scandinavia, dairy played a bigger role. But in harsher climates like Greenland or Iceland, people leaned heavily on seafood and hunting. It all depended on where you were and how many goats were feeling cooperative that year. One elderly man invites you to join him for a midday bite. His meal? A chunk of smoked goat meat, a wedge of hard cheese, and a strip of dried reindeer. The cheese is salty, pungent, and slightly crunchy. You pretend to enjoy it, nodding slowly as if your taste buds aren't screaming. Reindeer were occasionally hunted in Norway and parts of Sweden. Though not domesticated in the Viking Age, they were tracked in the forests using wooden skis and bows. You imagine gliding silently through a snow-draped forest in animal hide boots, eyes sharp, ears tuned to every crackle of twig. Then you imagine slipping, face-planting, and scaring off the entire herd. The hunting tools here are primitive but effective. Spears, bows, slings, nothing fancy, but they work. And they're made with skill. Shafts polished smooth, flint sharpened to a whisper-thin edge, feathers tied with sinew. Every item is handcrafted, not mass-produced. A Viking hunter knows every inch of their gear and probably gave it a name. As the afternoon sun hovers low, because in these parts, the sun is more of a part-time employee, you return to the village. Someone has managed to bag a few rabbits and a ptarmigan, which is basically a feathered potato that pretends to be a bird. Dinner is looking up. You help clean the catch. The process is messy, a bit smelly, and done without complaint. The meat will be roasted or stewed later, the bones kept for soup or tools, and the feathers might end up in a pillow if they're lucky. Waste is not an option in a world where winter feels like half the year. You pass by a small side pen and notice something odd. What looks like a pen full of small pigs, all munching contentedly on kitchen scraps. These are the Viking garbage disposals. Pigs are fed anything edible, including leftover bones, gristle, and even some of that barley chaff from breakfast. In return, they grow fat and flavorful, perfect for winter meals or big feasts. Back in the longhouse, the fire's been stoked and someone's preparing a stew. Goat, probably. Maybe rabbit. Definitely onions. You can smell the sharp sweetness rising through the smoke. There's no written recipe, of course. Just muscle memory and a well-used wooden ladle. You sit by the hearth, warming your hands and reflecting on the day's food adventures. Seal hunting, goat wrangling, rabbit cleaning, none of it glamorous, but all of it essential. In the Viking world, eating well means working hard, staying observant, and occasionally dodging a goat horn to the shin. And if all else fails, there's always dried fish. Lots and lots of dried fish. The scent hits you before you see it. Smoky, earthy, and unmistakably breadish. You follow your nose to a small lean-to behind the longhouse where a woman is crouched over a flat stone. She's flipping something round and brown with a stick. Not a pancake, not quite a cracker, but definitely bread. Sort of. This, you're told, is flatbroad, or Viking flatbread. It's thin, tough, a little burnt around the edges, and built to survive anything from travel to siege warfare. You pick up a piece and tap it against the table. It makes a sound not unlike a knock on an old wooden door. Promising. Bread in the Viking world is not an everyday luxury. It's a labor of love and a test of patience. First, you grind the barley or rye into flour using a quernstone. This takes forever. You try it. Your biceps start crying. Then, mix the flour with water, maybe a bit of sour whey, Form it into discs and bake it directly on hot stones near the hearth. If you're lucky, the flatbread cooks evenly. If you're not, well, enjoy your slightly raw on one side, charred on the other Viking snack. Mainstream historians agree. Bread was eaten across Viking society, though in different forms. Wealthier households might have had access to ovens or more refined flour, while farmers and thralls made do with rougher, coarser versions. And don't imagine loaves with golden crusts. This was flat, utilitarian, and sometimes flecked with sand from poorly ground flour. Yes, sand, as in you're chewing grit. That's just part of the texture. Bon appetit. You take a bite. It's dry, bland, and requires at least 4 chews per square centimeter. You ask if there's butter. The woman laughs gently and hands you something that looks like butter but smells a bit goatier. It is, in fact, goat butter. You spread it on cautiously. It helps, a little. Here's a fringe fact. In some Viking regions, ashes were deliberately added to bread dough. Why? Possibly for minerals, possibly because it helped preserve the bread, and possibly because someone confused innovation with accident. Either way, ash bread was a thing. Your teeth aren't thrilled, but hey, it's high in fiber. Around you, others are busy baking and preparing meals. One man has wrapped a chunk of dough around a stick and is roasting it over open flame, primitive but effective. Another is trying to store baked flatbread in a linen sack near the smoke vents to keep it dry. Bread wasn't just a food, it was a travel companion, a trade good, even emergency rations for long ship journeys. There's ongoing scholarly debate about the consistency of Viking bread across regions. Some evidence points to sourdough-like loaves in southern Scandinavia, while other digs find only flat, unleavened variants in the north. It likely depended on yeast availability, grain types, and how patient the baker was that day. A child runs by with a chunk of bread clenched in their teeth, laughing wildly while being chased by a dog. The dog catches up, and the bread vanishes in one triumphant gulp. You consider defending the child's honor, then remember you're a guest, not a gladiator. You sit back down by the hearth and notice a large pot bubbling gently. Grot again, this time savory. The cook tosses in bits of leftover goat meat, some wild onions, and crushed flatbread to thicken the mix. Bread, reused as a thickener? Absolutely. Waste not. Want not. You hear stories being exchanged about long sea voyages, how warriors carried flatbread in oiled cloth to keep it dry for weeks, how a shipwrecked crew once survived on nothing but stale bread soaked in seawater, how one particularly unfortunate jarl tried to impress guests with walnut bread only to be reminded gently that walnuts didn't grow in Norway. While the bread here may not impress modern foodies, it tells a story. It speaks of survival, adaptation, and just a dash of innovation. It may not fluff or rise, but it fuels. You're offered another piece, this time with a smear of honey. Imported, expensive, and used sparingly, but sweet enough to make you close your eyes in appreciation. For one glorious bite, you almost forget the sand. The woman beside you breaks her bread in half and hands you a piece. You nod in thanks, savoring the gesture more than the taste. Bread here isn't just food, it's shared warmth, hard-earned and never taken for granted. As the day stretches on, you pack a few pieces of flatbread in a cloth and tuck it into your satchel. You're told you'll need it for later, especially if dinner ends up being just soup again. You're beginning to see a theme. Nothing here is fancy, but everything is functional, made with intention. And sometimes, if you're lucky, just the tiniest bit delicious. You sit on a low wooden stool beside an older woman who's busy with a bucket, a muslin cloth, and what looks like very curdled milk. She's making skyr, Viking yogurt, essentially, though calling it yogurt barely does it justice. It's tangy, thick, somewhere between cheese and cream, and a total culinary anchor in Norse kitchens. She ladles the mixture into a cloth and ties it into a hanging pouch near the hearth, letting the whey drip out slowly. The leftover curd? That's your skyr. And the liquid? That's whey. Good for drinking, preserving food, feeding animals, or, if you're truly desperate, bathing in. You're not desperate yet. Mainstream historical fact. Skyr is an ancient dairy product still eaten in Iceland today, virtually unchanged. It's high in protein, low in fat, and rich in lactic acid. Great for digestion, terrible for people expecting vanilla flavor. You get handed a wooden bowl of the fresh stuff. It's served plain, with a dollop of wild berry compote, a rare treat. You take a cautious bite. It hits you with the force of 1,000 sour notes. Not unpleasant, just assertive, like it's telling your tongue a story it didn't ask for. The woman grins. Good for warriors, she says in her gravelly Norse. You nod like someone who totally agrees and didn't just pucker involuntarily. Viking dairy wasn't limited to Skyr. The cows, sheep, and goats offered up milk used for everything. Drinking, rare. Cheese-making, common. And creating butter, essential. Butter was a luxury item, especially in colder seasons when grazing was tough. The more butter your household had, the more prestige it carried. There's even evidence that some Viking rulers demanded butter as tax. Yes, butter taxes. Imagine the IRS accepting Kerrygold. The Skyr-making process is both time-consuming and finicky. The milk has to be warmed but not boiled. The culture, usually from yesterday's Skyr, needs to be added at just the right moment. Then comes the draining, pressing, and cooling. It's a science. If your lab is made of wood and goat hair, you're handed a mug of something white and runny. It's whey, mysa, the liquid left over from making Skyr. Some drink it straight. Others use it to pickle meat or vegetables. You try a sip. It's like a very confused lemonade with no sugar and a chip on its shoulder. One fringe tidbit. Vikings sometimes used whey to preserve lamb meat in airtight containers for months. The acidic environment kept bacteria at bay. Think of it as medieval Tupperware, only smellier and much harder to explain to dinner guests. There's still scholarly debate about the actual range of dairy products consumed across Viking territories. Iceland and Greenland leaned heavily on Skyr and whey due to limited resources. Denmark and southern Sweden had more grazing land, so possibly enjoyed a wider range of cheeses and creamier products. Unfortunately, dairy doesn't fossilize well, so we're left with residue, tools, and the occasional poetic mention of curds. You help with the next batch. The woman shows you how to tell when the milk's just sour enough. It's not an exact science, it's a nose thing. You lean in to sniff, your eyes water. She nods approvingly. Perfect. Nearby, children are chasing each other around with sloshing buckets of fresh milk. One of them trips and falls, splashing cold liquid across the grass. No one yells. This is normal. In a Viking settlement, kids are expected to help with dairy work early on. By 5, they know the difference between sheep milk and goat milk blindfolded. You barely know what's in your supermarket cheese. Dairy tools are everywhere. Wooden churns, clay pots, ladles carved with decorative patterns, strainers made from cloth or netting. Each household has its own rhythm, and most families guard their dairy habits the way modern chefs guard secret recipes. You're offered a wedge of mysuoster, a caramel-colored cheese made by boiling whey until it thickens and turns sweet. It's a rare treat, usually made when there's extra milk. It tastes like sour caramel met goat cheese at a bonfire. And yet, you want another bite. As evening drapes itself across the horizon, you walk through the pasture, watching sheep munch indifferently. Their milk will become tomorrow's Skyr. Their wool, your winter cloak. Their gaze, completely unimpressed with your modern sneakers. Someone calls you back toward the hearth. Dinner's being served soon, and there's talk of roast lamb, maybe even a butter sauce. Fancy. You linger for a moment, soaking in the sounds. Sheep bleating, buckets clinking, distant laughter from the longhouse. In the Viking world, dairy isn't just food. It's the background hum of daily life, a constant effort turned creamy comfort. And maybe, just maybe, you're starting to appreciate how revolutionary a spoonful of Skyer can be when it's earned. As the sky slips from smoky blue to ember orange, you find yourself drawn toward the longhouse again, not by the sight of it, but by the warm, yeasty scent rising from within. Inside, the hearth glows, casting flickering shadows across mugs, jugs, and a huge, frothy tub of something you now recognize all too well: Viking booze. Tonight you're getting a crash course in the surprisingly sophisticated world of Viking drinks, beer, mead, and a few things you'll wish you hadn't tasted. Let's start simple. Beer. The Vikings brewed it with barley, sometimes oats, and flavored it with herbs like bog myrtle, yarrow, or juniper instead of hops. It's cloudy, rustic, and a little wild on the nose, like someone tried to bottle the forest floor after a rainstorm. But compared to the alternatives, it's practically artisanal. You take a sip from a wooden mug. It's sour. Not bad sour, just primitive brewery with excellent Viking branding sour. It's also low in alcohol, maybe 2 to 4%, which means it's safe to drink all day, even for children. In fact, water here is a last resort. If you're drinking straight from a stream, you're either a newborn, a foreigner, or someone with a serious death wish. That's because clean water wasn't guaranteed. Wells could be contaminated, and rainwater wasn't always reliable. So even weak ale became a staple drink at every meal. For breakfast, ale. With dinner, ale. Can't sleep? Warm ale. Mainstream historical fact: brewing was primarily a domestic task handled by women. Housewives, mothers, and female slaves often controlled the ale supply in a home, which gave them a quiet but essential role in Viking survival. Mess with her brew, and you'd probably be politely buried in the bog. But then there's mead, the true drink of kings, poets, and people who want to feel slightly more majestic while falling over. Made from fermented honey and water, mead was stronger, sweeter, and far more precious. Honey wasn't cheap, and good mead took time to ferment properly. It was the celebration drink, served at weddings, feasts, and post-raid banquets where the storytelling was long and the lies longer. You're handed a horn. Yes, a literal horn, with a small portion of amber-colored mead. It smells floral, with notes of wildflower, wax, and just a hint of, don't ask what else went in here. You sip. It's smooth, sweet, and deceptively strong. You smile. This is dangerous. There's a fringe historical tidbit here. Some Vikings believed mead had magical properties, a gift from the gods. The poetic mead of inspiration, according to myth, granted the power of poetry and wisdom, which explains a lot about that guy in the corner who just started reciting a saga to a cabbage. Historians still debate how commonly mead was consumed versus just idealized in poems. Archaeological finds of fermentation jars suggest it wasn't an everyday item, more of a ritual or elite beverage. But the references in Norse literature are constant, so it clearly held symbolic power. Whether it gave you eloquence or a headache was probably based on dosage. Back near the hearth, you notice something suspicious. A jug filled with what looks like milk? You inquire, and someone confirms. Fermented whey, or surmjolk. Yes, you're back in Dairyland. And yes, this is also a drink. You consider faking a cough to excuse yourself, but the host insists. The smell hits first. It's like the ghost of yogurt passed. You take the smallest possible sip. It's fizzy, sour, and oddly refreshing. If kombucha went to a goat farm, this is what it would return with. One local joke, light sarcasm fully intended, is that if it doesn't burn a little, it's not worth drinking. You now understand that deeply. Outside, you hear laughter as someone spills ale on a dog who seems unfazed. The dog's probably tasted worse. Vikings weren't overly formal about drinking. There were customs and rituals, sure, but also a lot of flexibility. Horns were passed, toasts were made, and if your cup ran dry, someone usually filled it again before you could protest. One particularly charming tradition was the toasting sequence. Each round had its own purpose. One to the gods, one to the ancestors, one to the king, one to fallen warriors, and so on. It could go on for hours, and by the sixth toast, no one really remembers who they're saluting anymore. The drinkware itself varied. Horns, wooden cups, pottery, even imported glass for the rich. Horns had no flat base, which meant you had to keep drinking or hold it the entire time. Smart design or party trap? Jury's still out. You start to notice how deeply drink is tied to Viking identity. Not just in the physical sense of hydration or nutrition, but socially, emotionally, mythologically. Drinking connects them, to each other, to their ancestors, and to the sagas they carry in song. And just when you think the night is winding down, someone breaks out a small keg of herb-infused beer, flavored with bitter bark and forest roots. You've already committed, so you take a sip. It tastes like a tree dared you to drink it. You cough, they cheer, and you're handed another mug. Your cheeks are warm, your stomach slightly sloshy, and the fire crackles behind you like applause. There's a dog curled up beside your legs, snoring. A goat is definitely staring at you through the doorway. You're not sure if you've had 2 drinks or 6. But in this smoky, buzzing longhouse, it doesn't matter. Morning sneaks in without apology. The longhouse is still hazy from last night's fire, the scent of smoked lamb and spilled ale clinging to your tunic like a memory you're not sure you want to keep. You stretch, blink, and catch sight of what looks like strips of meat dangling from wooden racks just outside. No, you didn't dream that. Welcome to the world of Viking fish drying and fermenting, where meals are prepared not in minutes, but in months. Out by the water, dozens of cod hang like wind chimes of sustenance, their flesh stiffening in the breeze. Nearby, a different rack holds slabs of shark meat, covered in a cheesecloth and giving off a smell that can only be described as "don't stand too close." This, your guide says with a grin, is hakarl, fermented Greenland shark, a true delicacy. Also, a biohazard. Mainstream historical fact. Fish preservation was critical in Norse culture. Drying, salting, and fermenting allowed them to store protein for the long, brutal winters when hunting was scarce and farms were snowed under. Stockfish, the dried version of cod, became so common that it was used for trade across Europe. It's tough, nearly indestructible, and can last for years, like Jerky's grumpy grandfather. You try some. Your jaw aches after 30 seconds of chewing. It tastes like the idea of fish more than actual fish, but it's filling, and paired with some sour skyer or ale, it does the job. Fermentation, however, is where things get interesting. Not content with just drying fish, the Vikings also buried it, sometimes in sand, sometimes in gravel, letting it rot just enough to become edible by their standards. Hakarl is the poster child for this method. The shark itself is poisonous when fresh, thanks to its high urea content. So the trick is to ferment it for months, letting time and pressure neutralize the toxins. Fringe fact, the shark doesn't have kidneys, which means it filters toxins through its skin. So eating it fresh? A hard no. But after months underground and weeks drying in open air, it becomes a chewy, ammonia-rich cube of pride and tradition. And yes, you're offered some. You take a bite. Instantly, your sinuses are clear. Your vision sharpens. Your soul briefly leaves your body. The ammonia hits like an unholy alliance of cleaning product and old sock, but the people around you cheer. You are now, officially, a little bit Viking. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about how widespread shark fermentation really was. While it's well documented in Iceland, some argue that it was more of a regional practice born out of necessity. Greenland shark is only found in colder waters. Others believe versions of fermented fish existed across the Norse world, just with less drama. Back at the longhouse, a woman is layering fresh trout between slabs of salt and placing them in a barrel. This is salt curing, another preservation method used widely when salt was available, though it was expensive and often imported. The result? A salty, tangy fish product that could be stored for months. Someone else is making gravlax, a more palatable dish by modern standards. It involves curing salmon with salt, sugar, and sometimes herbs, then pressing it under weight for a few days. The Vikings may not have had refrigerators, but they understood gravity and patience. The air outside smells like smoke, sea, and something vaguely fishy that you've now accepted as part of your Viking ambiance. Dogs sniff the drying racks, but they know better than to steal. Even they have boundaries. Meanwhile, fish oil is being collected in clay jars near the fire. It'll be used in lamps, medicines, and sometimes even in food. The oil is strong, pungent, and allegedly good for your joints. You hope never to find out. By midday, a large pot of fish stew is bubbling over the hearth. It's thick, murky, and laced with herbs and root vegetables. Dried cod is rehydrated in the broth until it's tender enough to chew without injury. A few strips of fermented trout are added for depth of flavor. Depth being generous, considering it still smells like someone boiled a boot. You sit with the group, sipping the stew slowly, careful not to offend. It's not bad. It's just very assertive. But in a land of long winters, short summers, and temperamental goats, assertive food keeps you alive. Someone passes around a bowl of skyr to cool the palate. The tartness helps. A small girl offers you a piece of rye bread to soak up the broth. It's hard as stone but effective. As the meal winds down, the storytelling picks up. One man brags that his grandfather once survived a sea voyage with nothing but dried fish and 2 onions. Another claims his cousin tried fermenting eel once and wasn't invited to feast again. A woman adds dryly that the dog enjoyed it, though. You begin to understand. In the Viking world, food isn't just nourishment. It's endurance. It's community. It's the quiet magic of turning harsh ingredients into something edible, or at least chewable. And as the sun dips low again, casting a golden shimmer across the racks of drying cod, you realize you've started to develop a taste for the strange, smoky world of Viking seafood. Or at the very least, you've developed the ability to pretend you like it. By now, the scent of wood smoke and dried fish is so embedded in your cloak, your pores, and possibly your soul, that you almost don't notice the shift in the air. But then you hear it. Laughter, loud, rhythmic, slightly slurred, followed by the deep thump of a drum and a cheerful, drunken yell. You glance toward the mead hall, where firelight dances through the open door and the sound of feasting beckons. Tonight, you're not just observing Viking cuisine, you're joining the banquet. The longhouse is transformed. Benches are crowded, mugs are brimming, and every table is sagging under the weight of roasted meats, flatbreads, bowls of stewed turnips, and platters of smoked fish. Children run between legs, dogs patrol the floor, and someone's uncle is already reciting verses he half remembers from last winter's storytelling competition. Mainstream historical fact. Viking feasts were not casual affairs. These were vital social events, used to seal alliances, celebrate victories, honor the gods, or simply survive another harsh season together. The feast was where reputations were made, grievances were softened or sharpened, and new sagas were born. You're handed a slab of roasted lamb on a piece of bark, nature's plate. It's salty, smoky, and slightly charred at the edges. No utensils, of course. You dig in with your hands. The fat glistens, and the flavor is rich enough to make you momentarily forget the fermented shark incident. Almost. A woman beside you offers a small dish of pickled mushrooms and onions. Tangy, earthy, and surprisingly fresh-tasting, they cut through the meat's heaviness beautifully. The mushrooms were foraged just weeks ago, while the onions have been steeped in sour whey, absorbing that unmistakable Viking zing. Nearby, someone raises a horn and calls for a bragerfull, a ceremonial toast. You pause as everyone goes silent. The toast is to a fallen warrior, lost last winter in a snowstorm. Mugs are raised, solemn words are spoken, and then, as quickly as it came, the silence breaks into cheers. The horn makes its rounds. If it reaches you, you drink. No exceptions. You do. It burns a little. You're fine. There's a rhythm to this feast, and it's not just the drums. Food arrives in waves. Smoked pork, fatty sausages, dried fish, flatbread slathered with goat butter. You try to keep up, chewing politely, nodding approvingly, and discreetly palming anything suspicious to the nearest appreciative dog. A fringe tidbit. Some Viking feasts included svid, boiled sheep's head. It was split, roasted or boiled, and served with the eyes and tongue intact, a delicacy. You hear whispers that one might be on tonight's menu. You make a note to stay near the back of the line. At the head of the longhouse, the host, likely a local chieftain or wealthy farmer, stands with a raised mug. He thanks the gods, praises the year's harvest, and invites a skald to entertain the hall. The skald is the Viking poet-historian, part bard, part memory stick. He launches into a rhythmic saga of Thor's fishing trip for the Midgard serpent, complete with sound effects and occasional mug sloshing. You grin. Somewhere between the mead, the lamb grease, and the poetry, you forget the cold outside. There's a scholarly debate about how frequent these banquets really were. Some argue they were reserved for elites, warriors, and special occasions. Others suggest that community gatherings, even modest ones, were more common, especially in close-knit rural settlements. Either way, feasting was a crucial thread in the social fabric. Toward the back of the hall, a group of children are roasting nuts over coals, hazelnuts and beechnuts mostly. Their smoky crunch offers a welcome change of texture after all the softness and salt. One of them hands you a handful, still warm. You thank her, and she looks suspicious. You're still the stranger here after all. Dessert, such as it is, comes in the form of fruit preserves. Wild berries boiled down with a bit of honey or thickened whey. It's sticky, tart, and served in little wooden bowls. You dip your bread in and sigh contentedly. It's no chocolate cake, but it tastes like someone tried, and that counts for a lot. A man beside you begins carving runes into a bone. His name, maybe, or a charm of thanks to the gods for the meal. Others are dancing now, stomping in time with the drum beat, their cloaks swirling, their mugs dangerously close to spilling. You notice how the food fuels not just their bodies, but their bonds. Each shared dish a reminder that they face the long winter together. You sit back, full, warm, slightly tipsy, and not entirely sure whether it's the food or the company that's made this the most welcome part of your journey yet. Then someone loudly demands a rematch of the butter wrestling from last spring. You decide that's your cue to take a walk. You step outside the mead hall, cheeks still warm, cloak dusted with breadcrumbs, and find yourself inhaling a fresher breath of air. One tinged not with smoke, but moss and pine. The stars blink above like cautious gods, and somewhere off in the trees, an owl offers commentary. Tonight, you're off to explore the quieter side of Viking nourishment, foraging. The forest isn't just a source of firewood or the occasional misplaced goat. For the Vikings, it's a year-round pantry filled with edible gifts, if you know where to look, and more importantly, when. Your guide is a boy of about 10, holding a woven basket and a confidence well beyond his years. He shows you how to spot cloudberries, golden orange, tart, and ridiculously prized. Found mostly in boggy areas, these berries are the hidden gems of the Viking North. Eaten fresh, dried, or boiled into preserves, they're a rare burst of sweetness in a diet that leans hard into savory. Mainstream historical fact: foraging was essential to Viking subsistence. Berries, nuts, roots, and herbs provided much-needed vitamins, especially during the long winter months when fresh produce was non-existent. The forest was a natural supplement aisle, minus the flashy labels. You kneel to pluck some lingonberries next. Sharp, sour, and slightly bitter, they're not quite dessert material, but they do well in sauces, especially for cutting through the richness of meats. You sample a few. Your tongue puckers. Your guide giggles. A rite of passage, clearly. Further along, you stumble across hazelnut trees, their bounty hidden beneath thick leaves. The nuts are still in their husks, hard, smooth, and perfect for roasting. Vikings cracked them with stones, used them as winter snacks, and occasionally ground them into flour when grain was scarce. That nutty flavor shows up in some of their stews, too. Think prehistoric seasoning packets. One quirky tidbit. It's believed Vikings may have foraged wild mushrooms, though scholars remain cautious on this point. Mushroom poisoning is no joke, and Norse sagas don't mention many fungi adventures. That said, certain edible varieties, like chanterelles, grow abundantly in the region and would have been hard to ignore. You see a few now, golden and trumpet-shaped. Your guide shrugs. My grandmother says only the brave or the foolish pick those. There's a scholarly debate over just how structured Viking foraging habits were. Some argue it was deeply embedded in their seasonal routines, with certain weeks set aside to gather specific plants. Others believe it was more opportunistic. Take what you find, when you find it, and thank the land quietly under your breath. You pass a patch of wild garlic, its scent cutting through the earthy air like an herbal whisper. It's likely used in broths or rubbed on meat before roasting. Next to it, someone has placed a small stone marker, probably a sign to return later. Even foraging has etiquette here. As the trail curves closer to the shoreline, the flora changes. Seaweed clings to the rocks, glistening and olive green. It's dried and crumbled into soups for extra salt and minerals. Some households even steeped it in boiling water to make a sort of Viking miso. You try a piece raw. It's chewy, salty, and tastes like a high five from Poseidon. A gust of wind sends bracken rustling behind you. Your young guide suddenly crouches, eyes scanning. You freeze, thinking this might be the setup for a dramatic elk chase, but it's just a nest of edible bird eggs tucked under leaves. These are taken sparingly and usually eaten boiled. One broken shell nearby suggests a fox beat you to it. You head back toward the settlement as the forest gives way to scattered fields and hedgerows. Here, the foraging becomes more agricultural. Wild turnips, sorrel, and nettles peek from the grass. Nettles, once boiled to remove their sting, are thrown into stews or brewed as tea. The Vikings were nothing if not creative with discomfort. A final stop brings you to a beehive, carefully protected by a wicker fence. The honey harvest happens just once or twice a year and is closely guarded. Honey sweetens berry preserves, enriches porridge, and, most sacred of all, ferments into mead. But tonight, you get a small taste right from the comb. It's floral, complex, and unexpectedly emotional. Maybe you're tired. Or maybe that's what real honey tastes like when you've walked half the day to find it. You return to the longhouse with twigs in your boots, hands sticky with juice, and a basket now half full of the forest's generosity. Your guide disappears without ceremony, probably off to brag about schooling the foreigner. Inside, someone is already turning your berries into a bubbling syrup over the hearth. A chunk of bread waits nearby. It's coarse, but you tear it open and dip. The sweet and sour mix is a revelation. No sugar, no preservatives. Just fire, fruit, and a little patience. As the hall quiets for the evening, you realize that for the Vikings, foraging wasn't a chore. It was tradition, a rhythm, a dialogue with the land that stretched back generations. You settle down by the fire, legs sore, stomach content, and heart oddly full. Tomorrow you'll eat olives from Byzantium. Tonight it's all about the forest. Dawn creeps over the fjord like a slow exhale, casting a pink shimmer on the water and the curved hulls of boats bobbing lazily at anchor. Today, you're not hunting, foraging, or wrestling goats. Today, you meet the Viking trader, and he's just returned, with goods from lands far beyond this misty bay. You watch as sacks, jars, bundles, and mysterious crates are hauled from the ship's hold and laid out on the muddy shore like treasure. But this isn't gold or jewels. It's food, imported delights, and with them, hints of faraway cultures that most of your village has only heard about in sagas. A tall man with sun-darkened skin and a coin-strung beard slices open a linen-wrapped bundle to reveal something truly shocking. Raisins. Yes, grapes, sun-dried in the warm lands of Francia or Iberia, now nestled in the palm of your hand. You pop one into your mouth. It's chewy, sweet, and tastes like time traveled through a fig tree. Mainstream historical fact. Viking traders traveled widely, establishing routes that stretched from the British Isles to the Abbasid Caliphate. Through these networks, they brought back not just silver, silk, and weapons, but food. Olives, spices, dried fruits, and oils, exotic items that were rare, expensive, and status-boosting at feasts. Next comes olive oil, stored in a clay amphora shaped like a chubby fish. You dip a chunk of flatbread into it. It's smooth, golden, and fragrant in a way that makes your Viking butter taste like a muddy insult. Most villagers can't afford to use oil for cooking, but a few drops in a stew? That's bragging rights for weeks. The fringe item today is something that gets an audible gasp from the children. Cinnamon. Real cinnamon sticks, brought all the way from Arabia, likely traded through several hands and cities before landing here in this muddy field. The trader shaves off a sliver and drops it into a warm beer. It infuses the drink with a ghost of warmth and sweetness. You wonder if your ancestors would even recognize this as beer. The villagers are intrigued. A few are suspicious. One man sniffs the cinnamon and immediately sneezes 3 times. There's dried dates from Persia, wrapped in leaves and sweeter than anything you've tasted in months. One woman dips hers in Skyer and claims it's better than mead. A bold claim. A few heads nod. One man quietly scoffs and sips more mead. You inspect a bag of almonds, another import. Crunchy, fatty, satisfying. Rich in calories and even richer in social capital. Because if you're eating almonds here, you're either a trader, a chieftain, or trying very hard to impress a visiting skald. There's an ongoing scholarly debate over how widespread and frequent such food imports were. Some argue they were limited to coastal elites and cities like Hedeby or Birka, where trade flourished. Others believe the goods trickled inland more than we think, changing hands many times and appearing in unexpected places, like the pouch of a farmer's daughter at a midsummer festival. As you poke through the remaining goods, you find dried citrus peel, figs, and a dark syrupy liquid in a sealed gourd that smells like balsamic vinegar. It's sharp, heady, and likely used in microdoses to brighten heavy meat dishes. You look around and realize no one else here knows what to do with it either. A woman eyes it suspiciously, mutters something about witch water, and goes back to her pickled onions. But food isn't the only exotic thing arriving today. A clay pot carries spices from the east, peppercorns, cloves, and something labeled only as warm root. They're rare enough to be used medicinally or ceremonially. One woman rubs clove oil on her gums and nods, eyes closed in what you hope is approval and not early-onset toothache. And then, just when you think the sensory parade is over, the trader unveils a bundle of Byzantine cheese, soft, pale, and wrapped in a waxy leaf. You try a bite. It's delicate, salty, and practically melts on your tongue. Nearby, your goat cheese glares at you from its bowl. Still, not everything is a hit. Someone opens a pot of fermented cabbage brought from the Slavic regions. It smells like regret in vinegar form. A brave soul tastes it and shrugs. Good with bread, he says. No one asks for seconds. A child chews on a chunk of dried pomegranate and whispers, "It's like a fruit that had too many dreams." You write that one down for later. You sit with the trader for a while, sharing a bowl of broth sprinkled with imported herbs. He tells you stories of markets in Baghdad, food stalls in Constantinople, and the taste of oranges so sweet they made people cry. You nod politely while trying not to look like someone who's only just discovered raisins. It's clear these goods aren't meant to replace local food. They're enhancements, curiosities, edible ambassadors from a world most Vikings will never see. And they carry weight, not just in flavor, but in status. To serve peppered meat or honeyed dates at a feast is to say, I have seen the edges of the map. I have traded beyond the fjords. As the sun dips and the goods are tucked away, you help store the remaining imports in cool, dry corners of the longhouse, wrapped in wool, sealed with beeswax, and guarded like treasure. They'll be rationed carefully, used in feasts, sacrifices, or as bribes in negotiations that matter. Tonight's stew smells richer, just a pinch of spice, a few chopped raisins, a swirl of olive oil. Nothing dramatic, but enough to turn an ordinary Viking meal into a soft whisper of distant shores. You take a bite. The stew tells you a story, not of hunger but of hope. Winter doesn't arrive in Viking lands so much as descend, like a woolen curtain soaked in ice. The sky turns a pale, moody gray. The sun, when it shows up at all, glides low and disinterested along the horizon, like a light bulb that's about to burn out. The fjord freezes at its edges. And just like that, you enter the season of famine, frost, and fish bones. It's early morning. Your breath fogs in the still air as you step into the longhouse, where the hearth crackles defiantly against the cold creeping in through the walls. Breakfast today is a ladle of reheated stew. What remains of yesterday's goat and root vegetable concoction, now thinner and shared among more bowls. Mainstream historical fact. Viking winters were long and brutal, with food supplies dwindling dangerously low by late winter, the hunger gap between stored provisions running out and the new season's crops not yet grown. Preserved foods like dried fish, smoked meats, salted butter, and hard cheese were lifelines, but never guaranteed. You bite down on a bit of stockfish, that air-dried cod you've come to know so intimately. It's been softened in broth, but still chews like cardboard that's seen too much. Yet it provides protein, and in this season, that's gold. People gnaw fish bones for the marrow, scrape fat off stored hides, and brew bone broth from scraps that would have been discarded in more generous months. A dog gnaws on what looks like the shin of last autumn's pig. You're slightly jealous. The longhouse pantry, once bustling with bundles of herbs and drying meats, now echoes slightly. The smoked lamb is gone. The berries have long been boiled into syrup or eaten with flatbread back in November. All that's left is the shelf of despair. Turnips. Just turnips. You help peel a few, their skins papery and discolored from age. One has sprouted an eye. You pretend not to notice. A nearby woman tosses them into a pot with bits of dried fish, some old bread to thicken the soup, and a splash of soured whey to brighten it up. It's all about making the best with the bland. Here's a fringe tidbit. In especially harsh winters, there are stories of Vikings boiling reindeer hide into broth. The outer fur was singed off, and the inner layers simmered into a gelatinous soup rich in calories. It wasn't tasty, but it was warm, and it didn't kill you, which, in winter, is kind of the dream. Children sit near the hearth nibbling on cheese rinds, softened in warm whey or broth. The youngest are given milk when it's available, but cows don't always produce enough during the coldest months. Goat milk is more reliable, though even the goats seem annoyed about the season. One glares at you from the barn doorway, wrapped in a tattered wool coat. It's unclear if it was intentional or the result of a failed sweater project. There's ongoing scholarly debate about how well Viking households actually fared in the dead of winter. Some suggest that most rural families experienced mild malnutrition nearly every year, with only coastal settlements staying better fed due to fishing. Others argue that well-managed farms, especially those with good root cellars and preserved dairy, could ride out the worst months without catastrophe. Still, archaeological remains show signs of seasonal stress in bones and teeth. You wrap a fur cloak tighter around your shoulders as you head outside. The snow squeaks underfoot. A man chips ice from a frozen barrel of fermented fish brine, used not only as seasoning but also, disturbingly, as a cooking liquid. He adds some to the soup pot with a shrug and a muttered, "It adds character." You help carry bundles of firewood inside. Heating takes priority now, more than feasting, more than games. With limited daylight, the longhouse becomes the entire world. A smoky, crowded cocoon where meals are stretched, stories are shared, and food is rationed with quiet mathematics. To lighten the mood, someone pulls out a small dried apple, split in half and shared among 4 people. It tastes like autumn's memory. A woman offers you a piece of honey-dipped rye bread, baked months ago and stored like treasure. It crumbles, sweet and dry on your tongue. But not all is grim. There's a rhythm to winter life, familiar if not exactly festive. Meals are simpler, yes, but mealtimes stretch longer. People linger by the fire. A man sings softly while stirring a pot. Children doze with bowls still in hand. Even the dog finally stops chewing. And tonight, there's talk of making scouse, a catch-all stew made with whatever's left: fish, roots, bread, herbs, and hope. You help prepare it, stirring carefully as the flavors melt into each other like stories passed down from someone else's grandmother. By the time the pot is ready, darkness has swallowed the world outside. You eat slowly, every bite warming your chest like kindling. It's not the most flavorful food you've had, but somehow it tastes like resilience. The morning arrives reluctantly, with light seeping into the longhouse like someone cracking open a door too early. A rooster coughs half-heartedly outside. You sit up under your furs, blinking away smoke and dreams. Today the village is quieter. No feasts, no foraging, no fishy surprises. Just a slow, smoky day in the Viking kitchen, a place where you're about to discover that cooking like a Viking is a noble pursuit, and an occasionally disastrous one. You start by volunteering to help with breakfast. This turns out to be your first mistake. You're handed a large bowl of barley groats, a wooden spoon, and vague instructions involving water, stirring, and not letting it catch fire again. No one's watching too closely, which may or may not be a vote of confidence. Mainstream historical fact. Viking kitchens weren't separate rooms, but integrated into the longhouse itself. The central hearth did it all: heating, light, cooking, storytelling ambiance, accidental hair singeing. There were no chimneys, just smoke holes in the roof, and by midday your lungs feel like you've smoked a mossy pipe. Your second mistake is underestimating the heat of the hearthstones. You place the pot directly on one and immediately get an angry hiss and a woman's raised eyebrow. She pulls it off, muttering something that probably translates to tourist. She then sets it on a tripod suspended over the coals. Ah, now you see the system. You try again. The groats simmer, thickening slowly. A goat wanders in, sniffs the pot, and decides you're not worth harassing. Progress. Nearby, another cook is roasting root vegetables on flat stones: turnips, parsnips, carrots, and some suspicious tubers you've chosen not to ask about. She uses a long iron spike, flipping them occasionally while brushing them with a mixture of butter and herb ash. Yes, ash, deliberately added for flavor and texture. You raise an eyebrow. She raises hers higher. Quirky tidbit. The Vikings sometimes used seaweed ash or charcoal dust as a flavoring agent. It added trace minerals and saltiness, but also, a faint taste of yesterday's fire. You begin helping with bread next. The quern stone sits near the door, 2 round slabs of stone with a hole in the center. You pour in a handful of barley and begin grinding. It's slow, painfully slow. Your shoulders complain, and you've barely made enough flour for a single soggy flatbread. Someone takes over with the efficiency of a person who's been grinding grain since before they had teeth. There's a scholarly debate about how complex Viking cooking really was. Some argue it was repetitive and rustic. Boil, stew, roast, repeat. Others suggest more nuance, pointing to artifacts like roasting spits, clay ovens, and fermentation pots. The truth likely varies between rural simplicity and elite experimentation. In short, some households ate boiled fish. Others tried to make that fish sing. You wander outside to help with meat smoking, where a small lean-to made of turf and wood serves as the smokehouse. Inside, strips of lamb and goat hang from rafters, absorbing the scent of burning alder wood. You're handed a fan made from feathers and told to keep the smoke moving. Within minutes, your eyes sting and your clothes smell like Viking bacon. Someone brings out a clay pot of beer batter made with ground barley and ale. They're dipping small fish, perhaps perch, and frying them in animal fat over a flat iron plate. The result is crisp, oily, and honestly delicious. You eat too, before remembering to thank your host. They wink. You're forgiven. Not everything's a success, though. Someone left the dried peas soaking too long. Now they're mushy and smell like regret. A young boy tries to rescue them by adding honey and skyr. He is promptly removed from the cooking rotation. You return to your groats. They've thickened nicely. A woman tosses in wild garlic, dried fish flakes, and a dollop of goat butter. She stirs once, tastes, nods, and then ladles it into a carved wooden bowl. You take a bite. It's, not bad. Warm, chewy, salty, and surprisingly complex. You made Viking gruel and didn't burn the longhouse down. Achievement unlocked. A final dish emerges, a thick stew with everything. Barley, dried herbs, fermented cabbage, leftover pork, and even a sprinkle of that seaweed ash. It's hearty, dark, and smells like something you'd want to eat while snow falls outside, and the wolves begin to sing. The entire household gathers. Everyone gets a portion. Silence falls, not out of reverence, but because chewing dried pork quietly is a full-body task. As you eat, someone passes around a burned cake. Not a mistake, but a specialty. Made with grain, animal fat, and a pinch of honey, it's cooked directly in embers until it's blackened on the outside and soft inside. You bite in. It's crumbly, smoky, slightly sweet. Like Viking biscotti, if biscotti lived a harder life. Your cooking day ends with dirty hands, a full stomach, and a deep appreciation for anyone who's ever made soup without modern cookware. You sit back near the hearth, eyes closing slowly, as someone stirs a pot of simmering herbs for tomorrow's broth. In this world, every meal is a small triumph, especially if it didn't catch fire. Night has settled softly, as if even the sky has decided to sit down by the fire and wrap itself in wool. But the air inside the longhouse tonight carries a different kind of weight. People are quiet, reverent. A goat has been slaughtered today, not just for stew, but for the gods. Tonight, you're witness to something deeper than hunger or hospitality. Tonight, food becomes ritual. A man with long, silver-streaked hair carefully arranges cuts of raw meat and organ on a low stone slab outside. It's not for dinner. It's for offering. This is a blot, a Norse sacrificial feast. Not the blood-splattered chaos of Hollywood fantasy, but something slower, more symbolic, and rooted in deep cultural rhythm. Mainstream historical fact. Blot ceremonies were held to honor gods, spirits, or ancestors, often marking seasonal changes, battles, or harvests. Animals were sacrificed, food shared, and mead poured out in ritual toasts. Blood was sacred, but so was meat. What was offered to the gods would eventually nourish the community. You stand near the edge of the clearing, cold seeping up from the soil, watching as the priest, Gothi, in Old Norse, dips a carved branch into a bowl of warm blood and flicks it toward a wooden altar. He murmurs something under his breath. Maybe it's a prayer, maybe it's a recipe. Nearby, a cauldron steams gently, suspended over a fire. It's filled with offal stew, heart, liver, kidneys, and strips of fatty meat, all seasoned with wild herbs and sour whey. The smell is thick, primal. You're told it honors Freyr, god of fertility and harvest. Eating this stew, they believe, strengthens the bond between gods and people, and between people themselves. You're handed a bowl. It's warm and metallic, earthy with iron-rich flavors and unfamiliar textures. You chew slowly. The taste is intense, and yet comforting. Like something your great-great-great-grandmother might have approved of, even if she was a little concerned about the salt. A quirky bit of folklore comes with the goat stomach, now being filled with chopped meat, herbs, and grain before being sewn shut and placed in the embers. It will roast slowly, becoming a dense, sausage-like dish that some call the Norse cousin of haggis. One child declares it smells like warrior breath. Everyone laughs. No one disagrees. There's also bread for the spirits. Simple flat cakes marked with runes and placed by the hearth or hung on trees. These aren't eaten. They're left for the land spirits, ancestors, or wandering gods. One woman makes them with barley, a touch of honey, and a sprinkle of ash. The runes speak wishes for health, harvest, a mild winter. Scholars still debate how widespread or standardized these offerings were. Some argue blot ceremonies were intimate, family-led affairs. Others point to large communal rituals, complete with animal sacrifice and song. Most agree the food element was essential. What you gave to the gods, you also shared with each other. The line between sacred and supper was blurred by design. A man pours mead into the ground, a libation for Thor. Another toasts Odin with a dramatic flourish. You're offered a sip. You raise your horn, whisper a thanks you hope doesn't offend anyone mythological, and drink. Later, when the goat's stomach is deemed ready, it's sliced open and passed around. It's chewy, rich, full of fat and grain and fire smoke. Some take it gratefully, others pass. One child pretends to swoon dramatically and is promptly scolded by a grandmother wielding a ladle. You retreat slightly, sitting near the edge of the gathering, watching the embers throw shadows across fur-lined cloaks and steaming bowls. The ritual is fading into meal, the sacred into the familiar. People are eating, laughing softly, passing bread and meat without ceremony now. And yet, you can feel it. This meal was different. Not because the food was stranger than usual, though let's be honest, it was, but because of how it was served. With intention, with meaning, with quiet ties to a world unseen. You think about your own meals back home. Packaged, convenient, sometimes even forgotten in favor of a screen. Here, every bite is tethered to something older, something that watches from behind the tree line or between the flames. The stew, the blood, the bread, all of it whispers stories of seasons, of gods, of how even in the coldest months, the Vikings found a way to offer thanks. And as the last embers flicker down to ash, someone places one final flat cake on the stone altar. No words, just a nod, a ritual in silence. The next morning, the longhouse hums not with chants or clinking pots, but the clatter of wooden bowls and the subtle choreography of everyday Viking life. Today isn't about what's on the table. It's about who gets to sit there and how much they're served. You quickly learn that food, while shared communally, reflects a quiet but persistent structure of Viking society. Gender, class, and rank are served with every bowl. Mainstream historical fact. Viking society was highly stratified. At the top were jarls, chieftains or nobles, followed by carls, free farmers and artisans, and below them, thralls, enslaved people. This hierarchy shaped everything, including food. Rich households had more variety, more preserved goods, and access to imports. Thralls, on the other hand, lived on the scraps, literally. You sit down at breakfast, grouter again, no surprise, but today you pay attention. The Jarl's family gets theirs first, with a dollop of goat cream stirred in. Their bowls are carved, polished, even decorated with runes. The carls follow, their servings plainer but hearty. And finally, the thralls, standing to the side, eat from rough bowls, the porridge already cooling. There's no yelling, no drama, just an unspoken order to the morning. You help serve and begin to notice other patterns. Men receive slightly larger portions, especially if they're warriors or laborers. Women get smaller ones, though mothers and pregnant women are often given a little extra when food is plentiful. Children eat last, often sharing, though no one is left out. A quirky moment arrives when one woman hands her bread to her son with a wink. He's about 6, smudged with soot, and already munching like he hasn't eaten in days. You offer to help him get more. He declines politely, chewing proudly on his gift bread. You ask about meal preparation, and that's where gender lines glow brightest. Cooking is almost entirely the domain of women and older girls, especially in settled households. They tend the hearth, manage supplies, ferment, butcher, bake, and preserve. It's more than survival. It's power. Quiet power, but power nonetheless. The woman who controls the larder controls the household's rhythm. Thrall women cook too, but with less autonomy. They follow instructions, often from other women. The strange dynamic here is that even within the hierarchy, women manage women. And while a thrall's position is low, some rise to become trusted household managers, overseeing kitchens, dairy production, or even trade. There's a scholarly debate about how much autonomy Viking women really had. Saga literature paints some Norse women as independent and respected, even fierce. Archaeological finds, including graves with weapons and keys, suggest significant roles. But food tells its own tale. Women might not lead raids, but they ran the daily engine of survival. And food was the fuel. At dinner, you're invited to eat with a craftsman's family. The father serves the meat, roasted pork in this case, starting with the eldest guest and working down to the children. The best cut goes to the honored guest, you awkwardly, and then to the household head. Everyone gets something, but not everything. Another subtle moment. The hearth seat, closest to the fire, is reserved for the mother and the baby. Even warriors nod deferentially. Warmth, it seems, follows motherhood. You sit beside a younger thrall girl, perhaps 12, who helps grind barley all day. Her fingers are calloused, her sleeves dark with flour. She eats in silence, quickly, her eyes flicking between you and the head cook. You ask her favorite food. She thinks for a long time, then whispers, "Boiled cheese with ash." You nod, solemnly. A girl of taste. Later, you help clean the bowls. One of the elder women explains how leftovers are managed. First, they go to the household, then to the dogs, then to the pigs, and sometimes, rarely, back into a pot for the next day. Nothing is wasted, not even the soup bones, which are boiled twice and crushed to flavor stew. Even seating matters. At feasts, the Jarl's table sits on a raised platform. Meals are served by attendants, usually younger women or boys. No one speaks unless spoken to. Each cup is filled promptly, each plate wiped clean. Food is politics. Hospitality is law. You help carry a bowl of honeyed oats to an elder. His hands tremble as he lifts the spoon. He was once a warrior, now near the fire, wrapped in furs. His portion is small but richly flavored, a sign of respect. In the corner, thrall children scrape pots. They hum as they work, not sad, not afraid, just present. Like the song has more flavor than the food itself. As dusk settles, you sit alone near the hearth. A woman brings you a wedge of cheese and a small horn of ale. She doesn't say anything but gives a nod that says, "You helped today. You earned this." And for a moment, you understand the strange fairness in this rigid system. Not equality, but recognition. Everyone has a role. Every role feeds the others. Some get cream, others get broth. But all must eat for the hall to survive. And the fire crackles on, warming rich and poor alike. You wake to a dull ache behind your jaw, not from battle, but from chewing dried fish for a week. Your tongue feels rough, your teeth sore. And when you look around the longhouse, you realize you're not alone. Everyone is chewing slower today. Welcome to a rarely discussed part of Viking life: tooth decay and Viking vitamins, the hidden costs of a rugged diet. You sit by the hearth with a wooden bowl of warm broth, swirling with soft vegetables and bits of barley. It's the first thing in days that doesn't require a full commitment from your molars. Someone hands you a wedge of hard cheese and you politely pocket it for later, as your teeth stage a quiet protest. Mainstream historical fact: Viking dental remains show surprisingly good oral health compared to other medieval populations. Their diets were low in sugar, which spared them the cavities that plagued societies with access to fruit preserves and refined sweeteners. But that doesn't mean their mouths were in great shape. Grinding grain with quern stones left behind tiny bits of rock in the flour. Those gritty particles wore down enamel over time, especially in older individuals. The result? Teeth that looked sanded flat, sometimes chipped or broken. You imagine your Viking dentist was probably just a blacksmith with a spare knife. You speak with a woman who's chewing birch bark. No, it's not a new Viking fad. Birch bark contains salicylic acid, a natural pain reliever, essentially prehistoric aspirin. She smiles with cracked lips and tells you it makes the ache hum softer. You accept a piece. It tastes like minty wood and poor decisions. But oddly, it works. One fringe remedy she shows you involves charcoal powder mixed with animal fat, used to clean the teeth. It's abrasive, smells faintly of last night's stew, and leaves your gums looking like you've chewed coal. But it scrubs off residue, and perhaps more importantly, shows you care. Dental hygiene here isn't about pearly whites, it's about functioning teeth. Then there's the vitamin problem. Viking winters left people dangerously low on vitamin C, which meant scurvy wasn't just for sailors. Gums bled, wounds healed slowly, joints ached. Those with access to foraged greens or imported dried fruit fared better. Others suffered quietly, mistaking it for the aches of age. You join a group gathering nettles and sorrel, both rich in vitamin C. They're boiled into stews or steeped as tea. The tea is grassy, bitter, and makes your lips tingle slightly. One elder swears it keeps his winter bones from locking. Another laughs, saying it just gives him better dreams. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about whether the Vikings truly understood nutritional deficiency or just noticed patterns. Eat berries, feel better. Skip berries, teeth fall out. Some evidence points to intuitive seasonal eating. Wild herbs in spring, fermented vegetables in fall, as a form of primitive vitamin management. You're handed a small piece of dried reindeer liver, rich in iron and vitamins A and D. It's gamey, chewy, and functional. Children are given tiny cubes of it as medicine. One throws his on the floor and kicks it under a bench. You silently approve. By midday, the village healer, an older woman with sharp eyes and endless patience, shows you a toothache poultice made from crushed juniper berries, goat tallow, and moss. It's applied like a dab of sticky incense to the sore spot. You try it. Your tongue goes slightly numb. Your headache lifts. She winks. It buys you a week. As the afternoon wanes, you visit the burial mound outside the village. The bones are old, warriors, elders, perhaps a merchant or two. The skulls show a mix of strength and wear. One has a perfectly intact smile. Another is missing half a jaw, a reminder that no matter how fierce, how clever, how well fed, a Viking's greatest enemy may have been his own molars. You return to the longhouse, chewing slowly on a piece of soft rye bread soaked in broth. Around you, others do the same. Some use their teeth, others use their fingers. A few simply let the food dissolve slowly. Dinner is a mash of turnips, onions, and fatty lamb, soft, warm, and merciful. It's a favorite of the elders. You find yourself enjoying it more than expected. Maybe because it's gentle, maybe because it's quiet, or maybe because it doesn't fight back. You sit with a young boy missing his front teeth. Naturally, not from decay, but play fighting. He shows you a loose one and asks if all your people cry when their teeth fall out. You smile and tell him yes, every time. And as the fire burns low, casting long shadows across the worn floorboards and the equally worn faces around you, you realize that Viking food wasn't just about survival. It was about endurance. About wearing the years, bite by bite, with grit, herbs, and the occasional birch bark miracle. So you drink your nettle tea, swish a bit of warm broth, and thank your sore, stubborn teeth for making it this far. By now, you know the rhythm of this place. The smell of peat smoke when you wake. The scratchy feel of wool against your neck. The way dried fish groans when it's finally surrendered to hot broth. You've chewed, sipped, foraged, and flinched your way through nearly every aspect of the Viking table. And tonight, before you leave this slow-burning world, you get to see what survives. Not in story, not in memory, but on modern plates. Because Viking food didn't vanish. It evolved. You're sitting beside an older woman near the hearth. She stirs a large clay pot with a carved spoon, deep and slow, as if turning pages in a book. She calls it scouse, a kind of stew that never truly ends. It's made of leftovers, memories, and whatever you've got on hand. Lamb fat, onion, barley, dried fish, turnip peel, sour whey. It's thick, humble, and fragrant in a way that reminds you of both hunger and comfort. Mainstream historical fact. Scouse, or scouse-like dishes, are still prepared in parts of Scandinavia today. Known by many names, they follow the same principle. Reuse, layer, stew, repeat. These slow-cooked, one-pot meals connect past to present with every bite. You lift a spoonful. The broth is earthy, rich, and faintly acidic from the whey. The barley has softened. The root vegetables have disappeared into the base. It tastes like something that took all day to make, but not in a fussy way. Just inevitable. Like rain. Or sleep. The quirky part? Some modern Nordic chefs now recreate Viking dishes in high-end restaurants. You read about it once. Fermented fish foam, pickled turnip dust, deconstructed skyr with edible moss. You wonder what the goat from 3 mornings ago would think of that. There's scholarly debate over which Viking recipes are truly authentic. The written records are scarce, sagas vague, and archaeological findings interpretive at best. But food doesn't always need a recipe. Sometimes it's a rhythm passed through generations. Wooden spoon to calloused hand, from hearth to hearth. A woman beside you adds a pinch of dried herbs to her bowl. Angelica, once used to ward off scurvy and evil spirits alike. She leans in and tells you it's her grandmother's favorite. You nod and stir your own bowl a little more gently. As the pot empties, others toss in new ingredients. Someone cuts smoked lamb. A child adds chunks of yesterday's bread. Someone else pours in skyr whey to freshen the broth. This isn't the end of the stew. It's just tomorrow getting started early. You walk outside for a breath of cold air and spot something familiar in the distance. A modest farmstead, much newer, but built in the same style. Turf roof, smoke rising. You imagine someone inside sipping berry tea, stirring soup, maybe baking bread on a flat stone. The continuity is quiet, but solid. Viking food may have begun in hardship, but it lived through care, through adaptability, through the steady, repetitive rituals of survival that became comfort. Even now, the modern descendants of these people still pickle their fish, still preserve meat with smoke and salt, still stir porridge with the kind of patience that only long winters can teach. Skyr is sold in supermarkets. Rye bread is everywhere. And somewhere, someone's boiling a bone for stock, not knowing they're reenacting the quietest part of history. You return to the longhouse. Someone refills your bowl without asking. You tear off a piece of flatbread and dunk it deep into the stew, letting it go soft before biting. It's not gourmet, but it is unmistakably good. The fire's glow paints everything gold. The room smells of roasted onions, wet wool, and a faint sweetness from stewed berries bubbling on a side hearth. You lean back, stomach warm, thoughts quiet. The longhouse hums with voices, low, tired, content. You've eaten like a Viking, and you've made it to the end. So now, with your belly full and the fire crackling low, let the pace soften. Let the taste of barley and honey linger just a little longer on your tongue. Your eyes grow heavier, your limbs settle deeper into the fur beneath you, and outside, the wind rustles gently against the turf walls, like the trees are whispering bedtime stories in a language older than words. The longhouse begins to quiet. Dishes are stacked. Embers glow beneath the pot that never really empties. Someone coughs. A dog shifts near the doorway. And above, stars blink lazily through the smoke hole, half hidden by drifting curls of soot and dream. You close your eyes. No more chewing. No more grinding grain. Just rest. Maybe you'll dream of the sea tonight, of a longboat slicing through cold mist, of salted air and seal meat, of cloudberries bursting on your tongue, or maybe just of silence, and the warmth of knowing that even in the coldest places, people fed one another. Sleep now, traveler of time. The stew will still be simmering when you wake, and somewhere a goat is chewing thoughtfully, wondering what took you so long to lie down. Sweet dreams.